Greetings, finders of both paths and stars. Today we begin our look into the far future with drift lanes to distant worlds. To celebrate the launch of Starfinder 2nd Edition, we're going to take a look at every planet in the Galarian system, both as it is in Galarian's time for Pathfinder and how it's changed in the far future of the Pact Worlds for Starfinder. After all, a lot can really change in a number of years, especially as technology and magic advance side by side. Since this is our first time talking about Starfinder, it's important to establish a few important bits of information about the setting and how it's changed from the fantasy game focused on a single planet to a science fantasy game with a whole universe to look into. And that starts with addressing the most immediate question. If Starfinder is in Pathfinder's future, doesn't that mean we know everything that's going to happen going forward? I mean, feels like we should, right? Future Galarian is right there, and knowing that Cheliax is still under Thrune control, or that all of Taldor exploded at some point, kinda takes the fun out of the adventures, right? Well, don't worry, we have a solution. Simply kidnap the planet and give everyone amnesia about it. Now no one can remember how it got taken or what happened on it at the time. You gotta love the common sense, simple solutions. While I am being silly, I'm not lying. Galarian really is gone, and everyone really does have amnesia. And not just about Galarian, about everything. This phenomena is called the gap, and it is somehow universal. Everyone and everything across every world has forgotten, well, not everything actually. The gap is kind of weird. Roughly 300 years ago, in terms of Starfinder's setting, the gap ended in the Galarian system. That's another important point about the gap. It doesn't have a consistent endpoint throughout the multiverse, some places ending sooner or later. 300 years ago is a good enough reference point going forward, though. Anyway, 300 years ago, the people of the Galarian system all kinda snapped awake. They weren't completely blank slates, a lot of basic information was retained throughout whatever the gap was. For example, let's say you were an adult that woke up from the gap next to your wife while sleeping at your parents' house for a visit. You'd remember who your parents were, that this was their house, that the person next to you was your wife, and that she didn't like sleeping here because the bed is too soft and the blankets aren't big enough. But you'd have no memory of the day you met her, your wedding day, or any of the good or bad days you had together before this. As you can imagine, people didn't exactly react well to this, especially because there were some huge changes that happened in the intervening time, like Galarian being, missing. We had a big evil god inside there, what do you mean we just lost it? Instead, floating in its place is a space station, Absalom Station, the core of which is powered by the Starstone, that magic rock that makes you a god. Don't worry, the station's architects locked that thing up tight, with massive layers of security preventing anyone from getting close. I'd thank them, but because of the gap, we have no idea who built the station, or how they built it, or why they built it. Did they know Galarian was going to go missing? And how did they get the Starstone out of the cathedral it was in? All good questions that you'll likely never get an answer to. No information source on the gap, or Galarian's location, has come up in the centuries since. Even the gods are quiet, unwilling or unable to explain things to their followers. The only information anyone has gotten is that Galarian is safe, which is way more ominous when you say it like that, in my opinion, but that's all we got. As the universe recovered from a memory overflow reset button on a galactic scale, another massive shakeup occurred just 3 years later. All around the universe, with one known exception, some kind of message or signal went out, bestowing information to every sentient species in the galaxy. That information? The schematics for a machine called a drift drive, which would allow starships to enter a previously unknown plane called the Drift. This is the Starfinder equivalent of Star Wars Hyperspace, 40K's Warp, or Z-Space from the Animorphs. Of course, using other planes to travel long distances isn't new. The Netherworld and its strange shadow proportions are just one example of how this was used during Pathfinder's time. However, the Drift has a unique property that no other plane does. You can't get there with magic, only the drift drive technology. Drift travel has a lot of its own rules that we could go over, but that's for another video. The quick and dirty is that drift engines punch a hole through reality into the drift, where distance between stars is much shorter. Once inside, you can technically just point your ship in a direction and go, but that's likely to get you spat out gods nowhere. Navigation is done through drift beacons, which act as waypoints for ships to move towards. This travel isn't instant, it's measured in days or weeks, rather than the months or years or generations this would take through conventional space. Later developments also created drift lanes, sections of the drift that stay consistent between 2 points and allow for even faster travel. Thus did the galaxy open up and expose the people of Galarian's solar system to a whole new world of assholes that want to kill them. The system suffered some internal strife initially, before enemies from the outside came calling and acted as a unifying force. First up, ready for a fight, was the Veskarium, an empire of lizard people who had conquered their home system before setting their sights further into the stars. The threat of the Viscarium was enough to force a peace in the system between the various worlds, which resulted in the Absalom Pact and the renaming of the Galarian system to the Pact Worlds. Now, not all the arrivals in the system during this time were dangerous, though. Roughly 80 years after the gap, the insectoid Shiren species arrived in the system, having broken away from their galactic hive mind to find their own way in the universe. And 160 years later, roughly 240 years after the gap, the world ship Idari arrived in the Pact Worlds, carrying a civilization called the Kasatha. The colonists here were the last remnants of a doomed homeworld whose ship had set off just after the gap ended. Their intention was to colonize another planet in the Pact Worlds, but upon arriving, they decided to instead remain on the ship, parking it inside the system instead. Both species would spread throughout the Pact Worlds and become steadfast allies to the natives of the system. But the peaceful arrivals wouldn't last. The hive mind the Shiren broke from, the Swarm, had arrived. The threat of the Swarm against the Pact Worlds and the Viscarium ironically mirrored the results of the Viscarium's initial attack on the Pact Worlds. The two powers collaborated together, fighting off the Swarm and bringing about a new era of tentative peace in the galaxy. Now the people of the Pact Worlds are spreading out across the universe, exploring and meeting new species all across the stars. And before we can do the same, we should make sure we're all familiar with our own backyard, which is what we're here to do on Drift Lanes to Distant Worlds. However, I mentioned finders of both paths and stars in my intro, and that's because this series is designed to bridge the gap between Pathfinder and Starfinder. Because we knew about the other planets in the system before Starfinder came out. They were all still there, still doing things, and even came up in a few adventures. So for this series, we're going to look at the Pact Worlds as they were in Pathfinder's time, look at how they've changed or stayed the same in the centuries since, and then we'll take a look at any additional changes that have happened between our introduction to the setting in Starfinder 1st Edition and Starfinder 2nd Edition, which is set to come out roughly at the end of this series if I've timed things correctly. And if I haven't, I guess you can point and laugh at me. I would. Each planet will have a Distant Worlds of the Past section and a Drift Lanes of the Future section. You can also tell what era we're in by the little epithet each planet gets, because they kind of change between the past and the future, so that's a fun little indicator for us. Keep in mind, these are going to be a very quick, surface-level look at each of the worlds. All of them will get their own video at some point that goes into much more detail. If you're interested in reading more about these, I'd recommend the Pathfinder campaign setting book Distant Worlds from 1st Edition. As a setting book, it's still largely applicable even to 2nd Edition only players. From the Starfinder line, the 1E core rulebook has a good overview of everything, while the Pact Worlds book gives a deeper look into each of the worlds. And available now is the Starfinder 2nd Edition Galaxy Guide, which includes information about the Pact Worlds and a variety of other worlds in the setting. If you only get one book, I'd recommend that one. It not only gives good setting information, it has great DM tips for running all kinds of science fantasy games. One final note. As of the start of Starfinder 2nd Edition, the Pact Worlds have their first member that's completely outside the system. While we do have information about this world, I'm not going to be covering it in this series. After all, while it's technically around during Pathfinder's time, we don't really know anything about it then, which means I can't really do the same coverage as I do for all the others. And since I make the rules, you can't stop me. 14 videos in 14 days, going over the entirety of the Pact Worlds. Let's hope I manage it, since I'm writing this first and I have no idea how it's all going to turn out. Get ready to expand yourself to the stars, Pathfinders, as we ride the Drift Lanes to Distant Worlds. And as always, be in your past or in your future, remember to explore, report, and cooperate. Oh, also, to commemorate the occasion, I got us a little something special. I'm showing it off in 3, 2, 1. Ah, darn it, I turned off the whole background. Let me try that again. There we are. Starfinder background is go. See you in the first video, Starfinders. Keep your eyes on those stars. Bye-bye now.